All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining to our sudo talks here. These are part of our webinar series here at Adigi. We want to thank you, everybody who's taking their time to be here with us. We greatly appreciate you. And we definitely want to go ahead and make sure you enjoy this time and you're able to essentially appreciate the content we're going to be delivering here today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the purpose of the sudo talks are, right? So this is for Mac admins by Apple experts. Here at Adigi, we want to make sure that we eat, sleep, and breathe Apple. This means that these monthly sudo talks webinars allows our series to be able to provide insight and be able to provide changes into the Apple ecosystem and how, as an admin, you get impacted by these changes. So make sure you stay ahead and always sign up for those newsletters, and we monthly be able to pronounce what the webinar series is. So thank you again for being here today. And with us today, we're going to be talking about about identity management for Macs and going beyond Active Directory. So what this means. Essentially, what is the space now looking days with everything being cloud, and how can I manage my local users using a Mac, right? We come from this idea of being able to essentially provide accounts to the end users on the Mac side, but how do we actually manage those accounts and be able to make sure that I don't have to bind devices to something that says Active Directory anymore. So my name is Manny Cabrera. I'm one of the solutions architects here at Adigi. And with me, I have Renato Carl. He's a support engineer level 2 here at Adigi. Probably some of you already talked to him over any type of support tickets, but he's amazing. We're glad to have him here today. So with that, Naku, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thank you, Manny. So as Manny said, first we're going to be talking about Active Directory and macOS binding, which is sort of a legacy way to accomplish using Active Directory and binding Macs to that service. So binding is a older legacy method, as stated before, and Apple is really moving away from that. So today we're going to try to show you guys exactly how you can move away from that and move towards managing local accounts with Adigi Identity. Next slide. All right. So there are three types of accounts on macOS. So you have your local accounts, which is your standard account. You log in, username, password. Everybody should be familiar with that. But the two that some people might not be familiar with are network and mobile accounts. So I'm going to explain the differences between those now. So local accounts are a standard macOS account used for one-to-one deployments. It's recommended by Apple whenever possible. The user record is stored locally on the device itself, so locally in macOS, and it's the source of truth for authentication in the local directory service. So considerations for local accounts. We would recommend not binding your local account to any directory service. It can lead to some connectivity issues and a lot of complexity with that setup. So we recommend enabling directory connectivity with built-in extensions such as Caberos and other SSO extensions like Adigi Identity, which we're going to talk about a little later. Binding is, requires traversing distributed files and Active Directory certificates, which you don't want to keep managing. So even if you're bound to a directory service, you still want to consider using local accounts for this method. Network accounts. So network accounts is the source of truth for authentication for directory services. The home folders are on a network volume rather than locally on the device. Modern apps, file sizes, and types are present. They present challenges for network accounts because of this. It's not typically recommended. And as always, we do recommend using local accounts whenever possible. So mobile accounts. It's a type of network account, and you can identify mobile accounts via the user ID. It'll be something large in the thousands. So they're more common than true network accounts. They're the source of truth for authentication is the directory server again, but the credentials are locally cached. Um, they can cause login delays, and they also add additional complexities with synchronizing passwords. Now, it is supported by Apple, but not recommended for one-to-one deployments. So, what's the solution to that? We're proposing a solution of two things combined: added identity and the SSO extensible MDM payload. I, added identity simplifies user authentication and onboarding at the macOS login window. With added identity, your users can use the same authentication that they use across your entire environment with their macOS devices. There shouldn't be any need for any additional configurations on the provider side. Currently, Identity supports the following IDPs: Okta, Azure, and Google. And as far as macOS versions go, you can use Identity on macOS 10.14, which is Mojave and above. And I'll toss it to you, Manny.
Well, thank you very much, Ronako. I greatly appreciate that explanation about the different type of accounts that are supported in the Mac OS. And the reason why we want to be able to make sure we cover each one independently is because, as Apple explains, based on their uh, trajectory of be able to support some of these methods, it still not provides the best admin and user experience. This means that if you were to create, as an example, a network account, as Ronako mentioned, the essentially the credentials are not cached locally. You still need to be able to talk to the network every time the end user is going to authenticate to the device, and it's going to make it very complex at times because it requires some extra layer of complexity to be able to manage accounts that way. With mobile accounts, is essentially a type of network account. Even though some of the credentials are cached locally, it's still, when it comes to that management of that user account, it can create another extra layer of complexity as well. And again, it still doesn't provide the best user and admin experience when using a mobile account. So using a local account is the fourth method that Apple recommends, and to be able to make sure that you manage your end user credentials. So what does this mean? You say, okay, guys, so right, so we have the ability to be able to create local accounts, but how do I make sure that these end users are secure? How do we make sure that essentially whenever this has a password policy expiration of 45 days or 90 days under my current cloud directory, such as Azure AD, Okta, and Google SSO, how do I make sure that those end users are in compliance whenever they sign into the Mac? Well, this is what Ronako is explaining. Essentially, you want to make sure that we use a service such as Adigy Identity, which already comes included in your Adigy bundle product. There's no extra cost to be able to enable that integration in your current systems. And essentially deploying it is very simple, which we're going to be talking about that in a little bit later. Essentially, we want to make sure that you know that by using such a service as Adigy Identity, you have the ability to be able to simply deploy that to the macOS users and then have them sign in with already existing credentials from their current directory services. That will essentially create a local account, and on the Mac, it will cache the recommended settings from Apple being local. And at the same time, it will allow you to make sure that whenever that password complexity or that password reset is required in that device after a certain expiration date, is going to be essentially trusted on the Mac for that to happen. It's going to prompt the end user to type in the new password, and it's going to cache and change the keychain completely for that and local user on the account. So another solution or another proposed method that we want to be able to make sure that we bring up in this webinar that is also works pretty well with Adigy Identity is the XSL extensible MDM payload. Essentially, what this means is that Apple, since last year's WWDC, has provided the ability to be able to integrate a single sign-on through MDM. And this is huge, and this is great. The reason why is because with XSL extensible MDM payload, you have a couple of things that you have the ability to integrate and deploy with Adigy. The first one is that it provides any type of IDP account across applications to support Apple Enterprise SSL features, meaning that as you see in this graph, you have single sign-on extension MDM payload, you have your identity provider, and it talks to your native apps and Safari at the same time to be able to essentially extend that SSL login. So look at this workflow in which you're handing off the computer to a brand new user. They sign in for the first time to their Mac using Adigy identity as an example, Azure AD. Whenever they sign in for the first time, they need to access their applications, right? They need to access something like Office applications, and they need to access their portal from Azure or any type of access to portal.office.com to be able to access their resources, their company portal resources, right? Such as SharePoint and so on. But they don't need to necessarily type in the password more than one time every time they log into these different sites. With this MDM payload, essentially, it gives the ability for you, an admin, to integrate that SSO extensibility into the end user's credential to get that cache. And it can be enabled by mobile device management, such as Adigy is an MDM solution, and extends SSO to applications that don't yet use any type of IDP libraries. Also, the extension of the SSO application uses OAuth 2, OpenID, Connect, and SAML. And also want to make sure that we bring a huge shout out to the Adigy Slack community for contributing to important topics such as this one. The reason why is because community is very important. It is our heartfelt in our product. With community and feedback is how we get better. And this is one of the topics that was communicated through Adigy Slack community that, hey, there's this MDM payload that we want to make sure that we integrate with Adigy. Can we go ahead and get help with that? So we assisted the end users. They're very happy, and we say, like, you know what, this is something that we want to definitely keep communicating across our different customers that we have, and make sure they're aware of this possibility of integrating their SSO extensible MDM payload with Adigy and integrating SSO for end user authentication. So today's on the SSO plugin, we're going to be talking about using Azure AD as an example in Microsoft Enterprise. So Microsoft does integrate with this SSO MDM payload that Apple provides. They do have some requirements. So some of the requirements to be able to deploy this through an MDM is it makes sure that you need to have iOS 13 or later with the Microsoft Authenticator app, iPad OS 13 or later, again with a Microsoft Authenticator app, macOS 10.15 or later with the Intune Company Portal app, and amazing profile editors and MDM profile for you to be able to essentially create the actual SSO and extensible payload. The devices must be enrolled in MDM and Adigy. You do not require Intune, and you do not require for the company portal app to be actually accessed by the end user. Just by the installation itself is enough for Microsoft to allow you to be able to use this MDM accessible payload here. So configurations has to be deployed and enabled through the Enterprise SSO plugin that provides the IDP. In this case is Azure. So these are some of the settings that the MDM payload setting contains. The payload contains single sign-on extension URLs. So we need to first go ahead and essentially provide a whitelisting of the actual SSO logins with the end users going to be accessing. Here you can see a few examples of that, like login.microsoft.com, the partner Microsoft Online, and so on. The type must be redirect. There's a team identifier that needs to be included, and some of just other personal settings that you wish to modify as well, as you can see here. So these are just some of the SSO extensible payload settings that you can go ahead and modify them. So let's look into a live demo how actually all of this gets set up and how it actually looks. So let me first log into my Adigy environment here and give you a quick snippet of what it looks on the Adigy identity side. All right, so I'm going to bring up my screen here. So essentially have my policies right in Adigy. And I have this Adigy SSO payload. Under my settings here, the first thing I want to make sure that I integrate in order to use those local accounts being authenticated by IDP is my identity configurations. In this case, I have Microsoft Azure AD. We provide pretty good KBs in terms of integrating with each of the different SSO configurations or IDP providers, and in terms of how you obtain the client secret, how you obtain the tenant ID, and so on. So we recommend clicking here to be able to know more how to set up. Once you set up your client ID, your client secret, your tenant ID, and essentially you have the ability to customize some of these settings. You have the ability to block system setup while the service is getting configured for added identity. You want to make sure that if any users are created, you have the option to create them as standards or as admins. You want to be able to allow local account credentials on the identity login window. So in terms of having the ability to exit out of the identity window if any given time is necessary. Allow users to sync identity accounts that will allow to sync essentially any existing accounts that are already on the machine with your added identity logins or your IDP logins in that case. And then you want to be able to allow users to leave the identity window. That's optional. This is completely optional as the admin, how you want to customize this, in addition to adding some background image and logo. Great, so now I have set up my added identity information for my end user to be able to log in to their macOS device. Now, how do I actually set up that MDM SSO extensible payload that you mentioned? Well, the first thing is that you want to have the ability to make sure that you download for free a third-party app called iMazing Profile Editor. So what iMazing Profile Editor allows us to essentially be able to bring this configuration that Apple has created for a single sign-on extension as a custom profile in Adigy. As you can see here, I would just essentially open up the application, name some of the settings that I want to be able to custom configure, and from there, I can just immediately jump into my single sign-on extension configurations. As I mentioned earlier, we need to fill in some requirements. So we must mention that this is a extension identifier from Microsoft. Then that is a type redirect that is going to essentially forward that link to your end users as they try to sign in with SSO. Then you have your team identifier that you need to provide from Microsoft, and some of the URLs that the credential is going to bring with the payload over. In addition to that, you have the ability to also allow the app list, such as applications such as Outlook, Teams, OneDrive, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Once it gets deployed through Adigy, user simply opens up the app, it gets SSO enabled, and it's going to allow them to easily log in. In addition to that, you have the ability to customize some of the user sign-in and additional have the ability to enable or disable OAuth 2 application prompts and auto login if necessary. So these are just some of the settings here. Once you configure your SSO extension, single sign-on extension MDM payload, simply save it, export it, and come into Adigy and import it. At that point, we would just come here to MDM profiles and import that MDM payload. In this case, I already have it right here. It's called the Microsoft Enterprise SSO right here. And this is the payload that includes some of these configurations as a custom. I will just simply go into my catalog right here. Go to MDM profiles. And I would just click new and be able to upload this as a custom profile that I had already exported from iMazing Profile Editor. Once I have that defined, the next step is to be able to download Microsoft company portal application. Again, that's completely free as well to download. So by downloading the company portal, again, you would just need to go to Microsoft site, download the PKG file, click on new right here, and just upload that PKG file, and it will automatically bring you up with some of the configuration. So let's look at what that looks like right here. So if I have my company portal application, it's simply a PKG that will just upload it, be able to add the installation script necessary. Any type of PPPC profile whitelisting with smart software gets automatically enabled right there. I can go ahead and add my condition scripts and any type of removal steps that I need to be able to make sure that if I want to remove the app from the policy, it gets removed from the end user's devices. Once I do that, I simply go back to my policy right here, and I just add it in the policy and click deploy both for the MDM profile and the company portal software that I have right here. So I'm gonna just go ahead and do that. So once I deploy both from the policy, essentially the next step is just a get-go. I have already configured my Adigy identity. I have already configured my MDM extensible payload, and essentially deploy the Microsoft company portal through Adigy all. So let's take a quick look at what that actually looks like in an environment once I have deployed all these settings here. So I have this environment that has already Adigy identity deployed. So this is what the user experience would look like for them signing in into AdAge Identity. In this case, I'm just gonna log in. All right, I might have sticky fingers there. All right, so I'm signing in there, and I just simply go ahead and log in. Now, this account is a local account on the macOS system. Again, it adheres from my identity Azure AD provider security credentials, and essentially make sure that it goes in level with the authentication. Once the user logs into their macOS systems, you're gonna immediately notice that I have my company portal deployed. And if I were to go to my system preferences here, I should be able to see my MDM SSO configuration already enabled there. So let's just give this a quick second, and we'll go ahead and load this up right here. All right, I would just simply go into my profiles, and then from there I have the ability to make sure I see this. All right, here it is, Microsoft Enterprise SSO. Perfect. So now the next step, I just simply need to go into my web browser, in this case, Safari. And by opening Safari, it's gonna redirect me to my Office website right here. Great. Let me just go ahead and bring that up a little bit bigger there for everybody to see better. All right. So I just simply attempt to log in. And boom, it says sign in to Safari with single sign-on, like magic, right? So I just, again, need to go ahead and essentially log in with my Microsoft credentials that I have. Need to sign in once. All right, let's see. Perfect, awesome. So I'm already logged into my Microsoft services. This is great. As you can see, it's gonna go ahead and probably ask for two-type authentication. All right, type in this one more time. Awesome, now I'm signed into my Microsoft services. Great, so now that I have the ability to use my SSO extensible and I have added some of the Office apps as well, I can simply go into my Microsoft Word application as an end user, open it up, and that will immediately give me the ability to use my SSO extensible there. We'll just give it a second there. All right, and you can see that I'm already automatically signed in right here. Perfect. So I'm already signed in into my Microsoft Office apps, no additional authentication required. And that basically is what we wanted to talk about here today, the ability to integrate with your SSO services such as SSO extensible payload of Microsoft Azure AD and using IDG identity for local user authentication versus any type of additional network configurations or mobile accounts. So let's go back to our presentation right here. And we want to give some time to Q&A right here. All right, let's see what kind of questions we might have today.
All right, so there are a few questions that I wanted to answer with voice. So we have a question here that says, do you have a best recommended workflow for non-one-to-one deployments that include file vault? Can you provide a little bit more elaboration there, Ross? And then once you do, I can bring it back up. So we have a question that asks if we have a flow chart that will kind of demonstrate exactly how this process works. I don't believe we do just yet, but we can definitely provide one after this webinar, yes. Does the SSO integrate with stock macOS apps such as Mail and Calendar? Man, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so as long as you whitelist the applications inside the actual MDM extensible payload, and you will have the ability to integrate that component to redirecting. You just have to make sure that the links are also in the list where the redirection is needed for your IDP integration there. But it is possible to integrate other applications. As you saw in the list, you just put the extensible, the name of the application inside the MDM configuration, and it will allow you to be included in the SSO as well.
Great, Manny, thank you. All right, so let's look at some more questions here. So we have a question here that says, we use Apple Business Manager, Apple IDs with Google Workspace, and Adigy for MDM. Majority of our devices have the Adigy MDM profile installed on them, and I am trying to enable users to log in to their devices using their email address. I was curious if Adigy and Apple Business Manager work well together because there are a number of issues that I had to work out with Google Workspace. Well, we only support Google, Okta, and Azure right now as far as IDPs go. I'm not too familiar with how Apple Business Manager will tie in there, but we definitely be interested in hearing that workflow.
Yeah, please submit a ticket with that request at support@adigy.com.
Definitely. So we have another question here that says, if a password needs to be reset, would that occur on the Azure side? Yes. The identity provider is always going to be the source of truth when it comes to passwords. So we have another question here that says, does there have to be an admin user if you decide not to send the new SSO user as an admin and do zero touch environment? Can you provide a little bit more explanation to your question? I'll be glad to answer it once you have that.
There's another one that says, are there any recommended tools or methods to convert mobile accounts to local accounts? So back in the day, as a back admin, there's definitely some Gits that I saw online. I don't recall it from the top of my head, but I know there's some scripts that can help you out to be able to convert some mobile accounts to local accounts that I was able to use to be able to essentially make sure that I provide the correct access level to end users and authentication whenever they log in, because having mobile accounts does create some overhead at times as an admin, because it doesn't work as even though Apple allows it, it doesn't work very well, to be honest. And that's why they recommend pretty much creating local accounts in the Mac, even if the device is bind.
Awesome, Manny. Thank you. We have a question from Grant that says, if the user forgets their local password, can it be forcefully reset from the IDP? So yes, it can be. However, uh, the local password won't be reset. The IDP password will. Apple only supports a few methods for actually resetting a password. That would be using the reset password terminal prompt in recovery mode, or using your file vault recovery key. Also, if the user has an Apple ID on that device, they can reset it there as well. And keep in mind, this is a difference between a password change and a password reset. Apple recommends password changes to keep secure token intact. A password reset is a more forceful change, but the reset via terminal using the reset password utility is also a recommended way. We have another good question here that says, can each policy be used with different SSO, such as Azure for one policy and Google for another? Yes. As long as they are separate policies, yes, feel free to use whichever IDP for whichever policy. Just keep in mind that, there are different setups between each IDP.
Another good question that came about is how does Adage Identity plus SSO work with personal Apple IDs? Are you able to have a managed machine slash account and still have access to a personal ID? The answer to that is yes. So you have the ability to essentially make sure that you manage the accounts via Adage Identity as they create as local users. And you also have the ability to allow them if you want them to sign into personal Apple IDs. There's some MDM configurations if you don't want people to signing into iCloud that can help you prevent that. But essentially, it provides the ability to make sure that you use both if you want to. They're not necessarily tied to the other, as long as they're just completely separate. Another earlier question is, what if a user does not want to buy a cloud provider authentication system? Well, at that point, managing those devices becomes very more trickier, because at that point you're considering, their security on them, who's signing in. You have a lot less control in terms of the things that you can do on the user level. You still have Adage to be able to provide the users that are signing in into devices and be able to use some of the device facts, the rating system in a platform, to be able to manage users that way and be able to use the users tab. But as Renato mentioned, some of these workflows without IDP require for secure token. If you have file vaults, another consideration. So if you want to be able to reset passwords or be able to change passwords and things like that, and a non-managed user through IDP, then yeah, those are things to consider. So there's no correct answers, and essentially it's just be able to make sure that we have those conversations with the end users and let them know that, hey, this is why it's important, especially with all these penetrations hacks are occurring late in the year, especially everything being cloud. You want to make sure they have the optimal user account security as possible, and that's what we offer Adage Identity for.
So we have questions about recordings. Yes, the recordings will be available as soon as it's processed after the webinar is finished. We know some of you kind of arrived a little late. That's perfectly fine. A recording will be available as soon as possible. We do have another interesting question here from Max Drake that says, are there any plans on working with Jump Cloud? Yeah, that's been a feature request for a while, and our engineers are definitely interested in working on that. So I definitely keep an eye out.
Another question is, if your first user is the corporate admin account, meaning the corporate admin account for the device, and the second user is the Adage identity user, how can you attach user MDM profiles to the standard user? So we do allow the ability under a custom profile, once you upload the custom profile, to select this user channel, and then you have the ability to make sure that you attach the actual MDM profile to that user if you like to. Now, for this specific SSO profile, you can deploy it as a device channel. It necessarily requires to be the user channel for deployment to be activated. So you do also have the option to deploy it as a device channel as well.
Thank you for that, Manny. We have a question that I'm particularly interested in from Shane that says, any word on two-step verification being able to save the device when using Google IDP for identity? I believe when asking previously, it was a session not being carried over to the next login, and there was some interest in finding this a fix. Yes, there still is interest among our engineering team, and they're looking at that along with an issue where the part that it asks you if you want to remain signed in, we're trying to figure all of that out. And once that's figured out, we definitely want to get on this as well.
Another question that we have is, does using Adage identity require us to handle a machine before it will work on a new machine, or can we enable this and ship new Macs directly to the user from Apple? So that's correct. So you do have both options. So essentially, you don't have to essentially rework the machine or touch the machine at all to be able to deploy Adage identity. And by enabling inside the policy, it's going to immediately deploy to all users inside that policy. So that means that if you already have existing users, that's going to apply to them in addition to any new Mac that you purchase moving forward to your Apple Business Manager account and automated device enrollment. So this will give you the ability to be able to essentially deploy that existing configuration and the policy with Adage identity.
Awesome. Thanks, Manny. We have another interesting question here that says, on a file vault enabled Mac, the user logs into the local Mac user and then the Adage identity login screen, and that's it for sign. Is correct? Yes, Evan, you're correct. We have another question from Hayden that says, are there any conflicts with File Vault? No, there aren't any conflicts with File Vault. However, the user will have to sign in through the File Vault screen first, and then through Adage Identity. This is because File Vault is a pre-boot state in which the operating system isn't fully loaded yet, and the drive is still encrypted. So the user has to first decrypt the drive so the operating system can load, so they can be presented with Adage Identity. Other than that, no, there aren't any issues or gotchas with File Vault. Yes, there will be a recording after this webinar. Yes. Let's see. The 12.3.1 issue is still being looked into, not resolved yet. We still do not recommend going to 12.3.1.
Another question is, how well does this work for first-time fresh out-of-box zero-touch deployment setup? And based on our internal testing, it works pretty well. Essentially, it gives you the ability to have the end user authenticate locally on the Mac, create that local account on the Mac itself. And then if you want to be able to use the MDM extensible payload, essentially deploying that is very seamless as well. completely backend for the end user, but again, very easy for them to use once they sign in once. All right, let's see if there's any more questions coming up before we wrap it up.
All right, we'll answer one more question here and then go wrap up. So the last question I want to address is related to Adigy identity. Currently, there is a no internet connection detected when users see no internet splash screen. Is there any way to either hide or easily bypass this for users? It's not as intuitive for them to revert to the login window. Yeah, definitely go ahead and get a ticket in with us. So we definitely implement it. I believe a similar report of that, but I'm not too sure at the moment. Yeah, definitely go ahead and get a ticket file with us so we can look into that.
Another question here is, did I hear correctly that the requirements for macOS is to have the Intune company portal app installed, but does not require the use of Intune? That is absolutely correct. You do not need Intune. You just need to be able to deploy the PKG file from the Intune company portal app through Adigy. And again, this is only for the MDM SSO extension payload. For Adigy Identity, you do not require to deploy the Intune company portal app. This is just to be able to use the MDM SSO extensible for Azure AD.
All right, and last question I want to address here was, why was the login screen background removed in the latest identity update? That was so that we could proceed on fixing an issue where the file vault enablement screen would sometimes hide behind the identity window. So that was some layering issues with the background images. So we've removed the background image while we work on the fix, but the fix is already implemented. Now we're working on adding background images back so that you can use them as intended before the release. Now that we've addressed the file vault enablement window issue.
All right, well, thank you very much, Naku. So thank you very much for joining. A quick next steps is that make sure you stay tuned for more Sudo Talks. We have a WWDC after party later on June 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern. So make sure that you look up for the registration emails. For more about Adigy, if you want to see a demo, please follow this link, adigy.com/watch-demo. You can call us at 305-330-6677 or email us at sales@adigy.com. So we want to thank you everybody for joining us. If you have more questions, this is going to be recorded. We're also going to be providing a KB article on how to set up through Adigy and be able to make sure that you are successful deploying this yourself. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at support@adigy.com as well. Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Hope you enjoy this lesson for Sudo Talk for this month. Have a great rest of your day and an awesome, amazing rest of your week. Thank you very much, everybody.